Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the globalist propaganda that says that the Western world, or the whole world, but particularly the Western world, has got two choices: either 100% free trade or 100% protection. There is nothing in between. That's how it is. And if you don't like it, you are Hitler. So anyone who disagrees with anything about the globalist project is Hitler, by the way. So let's look at this free. What do the globalists mean by free trade? Now, free trade has been going on for thousands of years. This idea that it's some modern thing that's going to bring the world together, and without free trade, we're all living in the Stone Age. That's absolute, total nonsense. I'll talk in a minute about some trade that's been going on for centuries that is free trade. Now, trade traditionally is trading in goods and to lesser extent services, but those two, but particularly goods. Now, the goods could be raw materials, they could be finished goods, they could be partially finished goods, or whatever. So say for example, in the Mediterranean Sea, Mediterranean Basin, thousands of years ago, there was a lot of trade going on. Some areas had quite advanced metallurgy skills, so they would sell their bronze and later their iron in return for foodstuffs and fruit and grain or whatever. So there's trade going on all the time, and there were restrictions from time to time that prevented people selling things, too cheap. For example, there was a limited supply of the seashells that provided the purple dye that the Roman aristocracy liked. So there were limits on how much of those shells you could trade. Now, a lot of the trade wasn't for money; it was an exchange of goods, or a common denominator, sort of item of value, such as gold or silver and things like that. But the Roman currency or the currency of I don't know, any of the city states around the Mediterranean had no value outside of those cities. So typically we barter and exchange and things like that. And again, silver and gold being the effective currencies in a lot of places. So trade was going on all the time. In the modern era, the mercantile era in particular, as the Europeans developed long ocean-going vessels, then trade became global really at that time. So you'd have Dutch trading ships that would go all the way from Holland right round to what modern day Indonesia, and would get spices and so on, and they would exchange Dutch manufactured goods for the spices and so on. Then the traders would bring the spices back and then sell them around Europe to the local market there. So that was global trade. The same would be with, say, British or say Spanish miners going to South America in the 15 and 1600s and mining gold and silver and the like. Now, there would also be services involved because the European mining engineers were well in advance of anything anywhere else in the world. So the Spanish would bring over the mining engineers from Holland that would be specialists in pumping water out of mine shafts and various other skilled craftsmen and artisans and engineers. So there'd be an expertise would go over to these mines. Same would be, say, agricultural expertise when the British arrived, and even before them, the Dutch. British arrived in what today is the United States. And they would open up vast areas of land for growing things like tobacco and cotton and so on. And that was happening in the 1600s. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, in Australia, large areas of Australia were opened up to, say, graze sheep, as an example, and created quite a large wool trade that even today the Australian wool trade is huge by any measure, and also agriculture and so on. So there's a lot of expertise transfers, a lot of transfer of raw materials, transfers of goods, and trade in finished products and so on. So trade's always going on. It's this idea that the globalists talk about, it's either protection or free trade, and that's something that is absolute nonsense. Now, the globalists like to use propaganda and say free trade's the way to go, and hey, okay, that's the point. Now, free trade between nations or areas or groups of people or cities or whatever it is of approximately equal cost of living, standard of living, equal wages, those sorts of things. Free trade between those people does work, or can work anyway, quite well, because it's only their unique abilities or efficiencies or capacities that each area has. So they end up specializing in things that they may be particularly good at. So, the Dutch farmers, for example, are quite expert at producing various types of cheese and other value add farming produce. So they would trade, those things for the cheeses and the value add produce for other stuff, which could be finished goods or whatever the case may be. So this idea that the expertise that particular areas have, which could be in anything, it could be electronics, could be in metallurgy, could be in some form of finished goods, so, very high quality steel. Maybe in manufacturing ships or airplanes, or anything. It doesn't matter. They each has an area, or can develop, if you like, an area of expertise that then products and goods and services created within that orbit of that expertise can then be sold and traded in the world market. So you get some standouts, like, for example, the value add finished, say, machine tools from Germany, as an example. The Germans have been at the apex of that machine tool manufacture for 100 years, more than 100 years, and also at the apex of precision engineered metallurgy and things like that. So they and the German economies, typically, although recently it seems to be staggering, but has always had a large surplus in trading those sort of finished goods, which could be, again, machine tools or lathes or even value-add electronics and so on. The Japanese have also done fairly well in that, say, from the mid-70s onwards. So, this idea of trade has always been happening. Trade's been happening for thousands of years. It's been happening in the modern era, and it's been based on the particular efficiencies and capacities and skills, or maybe even natural sort of benefits, like an abundance of natural raw materials. Australia, for example, has vast amounts of iron ore, uranium, coal, and so on. So this is and has a lot of a huge wheat surplus, wool surplus, and so on. So Australia enjoys quite a high standard of living relative to many other parts of the world, because of some of these things. So trade. So this idea of free trade, though, it only works well in, as I mentioned a moment ago, in places where the standard of living, the cost of living is quite close, approximately equal. As soon as you don't get that, as soon as there's a big difference, like there is, say, in India, for example, where the average wage is $1,700 a year, compared to 20 times that in a Western country, or more than 25 times that in an advanced Western economy. So on that basis, India has, other than some raw materials, India has nothing to offer the world in trade terms other than cheap labour. Now, this is where the globalists sort of come in. Their idea of free trade isn't just free trade in goods and services, which few countries ever really permit. There are some for defence industries and strategic industries that a nation state may want to keep, at least keep viable, and they may do that through limiting the amount of competition that the local industry faces. But what the globalists mean is, when they say free trade, what they mean is mass movement of people and mass movement of jobs. So bringing in millions upon millions, tens of millions of third world peasants into the West as cheap labour. So that's one thing that they need. The second thing they need is offshoring jobs, manufacturing jobs, and even now advanced manufacturing jobs and things like software coding and so on, to export those to low wage countries. Now, this puts the high wage countries at a disadvantage, because it takes away a lot of well-paid jobs and sends them offshore, and also reduces wage growth by bringing in millions of third world peasants who have much lower expectations and who will live 20 people to a one-bedroom apartment. So they have a different cost of living paradigm to work with. So the other thing the globalists talk about, and again, deciphering their code, is the ability to move money around the world without having to pay tax. And this is a big thing for the globalists, particularly the big banks, the Black Rocks, but others too, the Indian investment firms and so on. Now, there's a lot of scamming going on, where money is loaned, for example, money is loaned in India to buy takeout food stores in Australia, let's say, and the two things happen. The business owner, the Indian business owner, has just bought the takeout food shops, and they usually buy several of them in a particular suburb, that buys the takeout food shops, then goes on an immigration scam to bring in peasant labour from the home country to work in the takeout food shops. At the same time, the money that was loaned to the takeout food shop has a managerial fee that's added, which ensures that the takeout food shop never makes any money, so never pays any local tax. All the workers that come in also fall under the tax threshold, so they don't pay any tax. So the whole thing ends up as being an acute net loss to the local economy, the local Western economy, and the whole thing's a scam. Then the money that's sent back to ostensibly service the loan and the management fee that's being charged from India or wherever, it could be Russia, it could be anywhere, that money is then effectively laundered and then distributed around in India to the relatives of those people that have come to that own the business and are associated with the business in the Western country, in this case Australia. So it's a major scam, and goes off and all this. So this is sort of the globalist model. So when they talk about free trade, these are the things that they really mean. Because if you want to buy something that's made in, if you're in another country, you want to buy a product that's made in Australia, you can do it. And likewise, in Australia, anyone that wants to buy a product from a business, for example, that wants to buy a product from another country, you can. There's nothing preventing, nothing stopping you from doing it. So free trade already exists. Now, you find some pockets of what's called protectionism, but it's nothing that really affects economic wealth or anything like that. You do find it in some basket case countries where they're protecting a large peasant population that's very inefficient, and so they don't want these people rioting, and so you get that. But these peasants have got almost a zero purchasing power anyway. They're not material in the overall scheme of the free trade chessboard. So it kind of doesn't matter. You'll also get other pockets like specialist rice farmers in Japan. Now, some of the plots that these rice farmers grow their rice in are quite small. They're not really viable farms in any international sort of agricultural sense. but they, in many cultural ways and in the quality of the rice that they grow, things like that, they do have a place there. So rather than have cheap rice coming into the Japanese market and putting these farmers out of business, the government offers some protection for the farmers. And again, that's not a big deal in the overall scheme of things. And there are various again, a lot of cultural in France, for example. A lot of the farms there are quite small. They're not really economic as an agricultural enterprise of scale, and so a lot of them have moved to value add type farming, such as exotic cheeses and so on, and so they can kind of do all right, but the French government offers them subsidies and protections and so on. Again, not a big deal. Doesn't really change a whole lot there. Some of that stuff gets exported, but most of it's for the local market. So the local consumer could buy lower quality cheese for a bit cheaper if there was no protection. But again, it doesn't really affect anything in the overall scheme of things. And that's not what the globalists are concerned about. They may wave that around as a headline issue to try and stir things up. It's not what they care about or worry about. What they want, free trade, is mass movement of peasant cheap labour into the West, mass movement of value add manufacturing jobs off to the low wage, basket case countries. Now, I don't mind if jobs are offshore, provided the workers in India or wherever they're sent are paid the same as they would be in the West. Because by moving the job offshore, you don't increase efficiency. In fact, efficiency decreases because the wages are so cheap in these basket case countries. Manufacturing and production efficiency just falls through the floor because it's so cheap. Because labour is so cheap in a lot of these places. The Western companies that put their manufacturing out there, they've got very little actual manufacturing. There's very little automation and those sort of things, because the labour is so cheap they don't need it. So manufacturing is 1/5 as productive as it is in the West, but because of the labour differential, these Western multinationals are quite prepared to accept that difference, because they can still come in at 30-40% lower than it costs to produce in the West, even with the productivity falling off a cliff in terms of nowhere near as productive as the Western factory, but because of that wage difference. So the globalization of free trade actually means a reduction, a very severe reduction in efficiency in terms of productivity type efficiency, but it's a higher level of efficiency for Western capital to be employed, Western money to be employed, because wages are so cheap, not because there's better value add, not because there's better quality, not because it's more productive, and thus it's a retrograde step. So the globalists are leading us down a path of lower productivity, lower quality, and they're leading us backwards just because the BlackRocks and so on of the world can enjoy a better return because of the wage differential. So that's what globalists mean by free trade. It's not fucking free trade at all. Nothing to do with it. It's simply a scam to increase the returns of mass capital, but without adding anything back into the community in terms of scientific advances, productivity advances, efficiency advances. None of that happens. Instead, it's all a backward step, but where they make more money. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.